been asking since yesterday. The plan was to
fix it.
To pay for the subscription.
Makes sense. Yeah.
$19 per month.
It's not. It's nothing. It's definitely worth it. I mean, although the Zoom worked.
Yeah.
The Zoom with the live streaming worked as well, so we have a backup. You wanted to get rid of it. He said, we don't need Zoom anymore. See that? So, all right. Welcome back. We're learning the laws of Kashrut. We did yesterday the biggest question, which divides Jews about which supervision to rely on. The real sugya, the most major issue is this issue of halak or regular. Does the meat have to be totally from the lungs that were checked, totally smooth, without any lesions whatsoever? Or you can have lesions as long as you check that they don't have holes underneath the lesions, which is the Ashkenazi custom. But it's good to be machmir, as I said yesterday. I want to just, before we continue, to discuss the other issues of treifot, other possible damage to various limbs and organs which could invalidate the meat. Yeah. I'll just say one more thing. You know, people ask me, what do you do, right? And I said, I'm Ashkenazi. That's why I grew up, that we follow the standard kosher. There's reason to be machmir here, even for Ashkenazim, and that is also connected to this. There's room to be more machmir because of the various opinions that we were mentioning. Some opinions say it's not kosher, right? The Shulchan Aruch, the Sephardi tradition, says it's really not kosher. Even if you check them, you can't have any lesions. So there's, those are serious heavyweights. But even beyond that, even if you say, well, the custom of the communities where I come from is that it's kosher, so we can rely on that, 100%, that's true. But there's another consideration. That is, what tends to happen is that when you have the Kashrut organization, which is producing the kosher meat, if they're striving for the higher level, they're going to be a little more careful about many other issues as well. As you have more supervision, you have more things that you're careful about, it sort of tends to spill over into other issues, which is a good thing. The more, what, as I mentioned to you at the beginning of the classes, there's so many problems with industrial processing of meat. It's not the same as when you had one goat, which you brought over the shochet, and he checked his knife before doing one slaughter and afterwards, and you could see what he's doing, and he took a lot of care. And now we have, a conveyor belt. It's a factory which is mass producing this kosher slaughter. More accidents tend to happen, and more mistakes, and more. It's hard to be as meticulous in a large industrialized production plant, more so than in your own home. And so there's always more problems, and so that's why we need more supervision. And if the higher level of kashrut is going to also require more supervision, you're going to get the benefit of the broad impact of that on other issues of halacha as well, other than just, are the lungs smooth or the lungs have lesions and they've been checked. There's other issues which usually tend to go together with a higher level of supervision, usually affect and give you a better result in terms of kashrut. So there's room to be machmir, even if you're not Sephardi, and that's why we have, of course, glat, and we mentioned that it's not exactly the same thing as chalak beit Yosef, but both of those, whenever you have a higher, when you're shooting for a higher level of kashrut, you're going to get a better result. And so I'm not saying that the regular kashrut is not kosher.
But that doesn't mean you should rely on it if you can.
If you can, get the mahadrin, right? That nowadays we're using terms which are not really halachic terms, but they're very common in the market. You have a regular kashrut, and then you have mahadrin kosher, which means super kosher, special kosher. There's reason to go for the higher level just because the higher level of supervision might be saving you from mistakes that happen just because, if you can, right. I'm not saying it's not kosher. Yeah. The questions, yeah.
Yeah, so regarding these, the certificate of Kashrut, we have the Mahadrin, then we also have, what's it called? I forgot the other name. And then we have normal Kashrut, and then there also Chabad. Chabad, they have their own, and they accept.
When it comes to slaughtering meats, as we started to say yesterday, the rules about treifot and how to check the lungs and all that, there's a lot of details. We mentioned some specifics, the thin lesions versus the thick lesions, the placement of the lesions, and all those there's specific differences of opinion, and some kashrut organizations are going to be careful about X and not Y, and some will be careful about Y and not X. And so Chabad has their specific X and not Y, and Y and not X. And so that's why there's so many different organizations. There's also, the real reason there's so many different organizations is, sorry to be cynical,
Money.
it's because every group, these kashrut organizations, they make money, and if they can say to their group of consumers, only eat our kashrut, then they'll be able to support their organization and mechanism of supervisors and shochtim, and not the other ones. And everybody wants to follow their own, so they have to. Unfortunately, what that means is that you'll find a lot of people, a lot of rabbis, saying only ours is kosher, all the others don't eat them, which is usually not true. Usually it's motivated. It's motivated by economics. It's motivated by creating your own bubble. It's and wanting to, create a social structure which is cohesive, which might be valuable, but it's not purely the laws of kashrut. There's a lot of other issues which get involved in.
At the end of the day, if you are starting to follow the Shulchan Aruch, the Ashkenaz Shechita is simply not kosher for you. It just isn't.
It's true. However, it's not like the Shulchan Aruch denies that Ashkenazim exist in the world. I really don't think that the Beit Yosef himself felt that all the Ashkenazim eat not kosher.
No, but it's not.
It's not the right thing to do if you're Sephardi, but no, 100%. No, there's a real machloket here. I taught it yesterday. I don't know if you were here yesterday, but
when it comes to these kashrut, I have my relatives. When we have barbecue.
No excuse.
When we have barbecue, they say like this, not mahadrin or bada'at or chabad. They don't.
They won't eat it. Right.
The most important thing, it's expensive. And for me, like on Shabbat, as much as I can, if I have money, I buy it from the Chabad. We have a Chabad butcher.
Right.
But it's expensive.
Right.
So at times I don't have money, so I have to go to the other kashrut.
The cheaper, yeah.
So does that make a difference, or it's okay?
100%. Listen, that's a good. I was looking at it from the point of view of the kashrut organizations and why they might have a separate organization and have their own specific things that they're careful about. But let's turn the tables and go back to the individual consumer. We were saying before, I'm very careful to recognize that those lower levels are still kosher, right? If you check the lesions and you make sure that there's no holes, that it's kosher according to the Ashkenazi custom. So there's no reason to say it's not kosher. But now, one of the reasons why it's very important to make that point is because that it's expensive. There may be a difference in price between the standard kosher meat and the halak or glat meat. And when there's a major difference, sometimes it's a small difference in price, and therefore maybe it's good idea to bump it up a level. But if you don't have the money, now that means that you're going to be weighing off different values. Of course, it's important to eat kosher, but it's also important to feed your family. It's also important to have enough money for dental care. It's also important to have enough money to pay for schooling, the better schools for your kids. And so we also, we're going to talk about chicken in just a minute. This class will hopefully be about the issues with kashrut and chickens. But there's many different values, and when it comes to money, so it becomes where are you spending your money, and that's why it's not so simple. Sometimes it's a very small amount of money, but if you have a large family, and maybe you live somewhere where there's only very expensive meat and very cheap meat, it could make a major difference to other values of Torah. Whether or not you spend your money on extra special kosher meat or extra special, maybe education for your children, or extra special, just having enough food to give them nutrition, proper nutrition. So there's always a balance of various values. And that's why I'm very careful to say it's not my way or the highway. It's not that you have to have mahadrin and everything else is not kosher. There's room to be lenient, more so for Ashkenazim, but there's room to be lenient for standard kashrut. As I was saying, even for the Sephardim, for the Beit Yosef, clearly those people that are peeling off the lesions and blowing up the lungs and putting them in water and checking that there's no air bubbles, that's not the proper method, according to Rav Yosef Karo. And if you're a Sephardi, you should be following Rav Yosef Karo. But, you have to remember what we started with. We started with saying that we follow the majority. Majority of animals don't have holes in their lungs. So even if you don't check them whatsoever, it's still kosher. If you're following the majority, you're drinking milk without checking any lungs, right? So we assume that there's no treifa. They're not doing the proper thing. The Sephardim, you have to follow Rav Yosef Karo's psak, and that is, if there's any lesions, you don't eat that meat. But it's very hard for me to say that that you can't throw out the chazaka, the fact that majority of animals don't have treifot, and so I think we have to have the bigger picture here and recognize that there's various values. It's not always the best thing just to get the most expensive kosher supervision and hope for the best. Yeah?
A good question, Rabbi, if you know how do these lesions appear? Like, what causes these lesions in the animals?
So I think the modern science says that there's a certain secretion from inside the lung that sort of forms. There's some kind of forms these lesions.
Is it caused by the genetics of the animal?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we see more of them as they get older. It's just a normal process, but it could lead to holes in the lung, and that's why they have to be checked. But it's a normal process. It's not a disease or anything. I don't think so. No. Okay. Let's see what else there is to talk about when it comes to treifot. Sometimes, so we mentioned this issue of surgery that we talked about. Sometimes what happens is, and we mentioned that the animals get gas in their stomach, and usually they puncture a hole to let out the gas. And that puncture might be a treifa. And nowadays there's other ways of doing it. They devise other ways other than puncturing a hole in the side of the animal. They stick a tube down through the esophagus. No, the trachea, through the windpipe, till they get, I'm not sure which they do, but whatever. They find a way to release the gases, which doesn't create a treifa. And usually, we nowadays, in Israel at least, most of the farmers do this other method. Sometimes this is a very common problem, is that you'll find somehow nails and maybe pieces of barbed wire. Plastic, usually they keep them away from the animals, but many times on farms there is nails lying around, and sometimes that can cause a puncture in the side of, it's called the Beit HaKosot. I don't know what that's called in English. if it's a serious hole, that can become a treifa, and it's best to check those, although, as we said, bottom line is it's a minority. It's a minority of animals which actually have these nails that are causing punctures, and so you don't have to check them. The lungs you have to check. We said that's the one exception. But the other parts of the animal, but if it's a common occurrence, it's a good idea to check for them to make sure that there's no holes. What about...
I thought the concept of the robe was excluding the lungs, even according to Ashkenaz. Everyone, isn't the
True, you have to check the lungs. You have to check the lungs, right. You have to check them. So, but in principle, we said, for example, the halacha is clear that if the lungs somehow disappear, somebody stole the lungs, you can't check them. The animal's still kosher. Right, because we follow the majority.
Right.
Right, so that's the basis.
The lungs aren't there, you still have to check.
You still have to check. That's right. That's right. Many times the birds get diseases. We know right now there was a big bird flu problem in the Golan, and the way to avoid that many times is they give them a vaccine. Right? They give them a vaccine. You might have heard of that. Yeah. Anybody here take a vaccine in the last year? Quite a few, right? So vaccines work. It's an amazing thing. And so how do? They take a needle and you stick it into the, birds don't have arms. So they stick them into their chest. Uh-oh. The needle in the chest could be causing a puncture in the lungs or in a different one of the other organs, and this could cause a treifa.
Treifa doesn't apply to a chicken.
Not true. There's 72 treifas in chickens, just like there's 70 in animals. And the Kashrut organizations had to deal with this in a major way. And the truth is, if you have proper veterinarians or proper farmers who know what they're doing, you can give the injection in a way which doesn't cause a puncture. And usually that's what they do. However, some people said, no, maybe there's going to be one guy who's off his game one day, and maybe it'll cause a puncture, and you have to be careful about that. What they did, the higher level supervisions came up and they said, let's use a shorter syringe, which can't ever reach the lungs or the parts of the animal. As long as it gets into the bloodstream, apparently it works. And
how does this vaccine
if possible,
keep the animal kosher?
Why would putting drugs in something make it not
yeah,
kosher?
putting drugs doesn't make it not kosher. There's something wrong with as long as it doesn't cause one of these 72 blemishes, then you're okay. It's good. It's good to try to use those shorter syringes if possible, and that might be another difference between chickens with one hechsher and chickens with another hechsher. You say, what's the issue of chickens? There's no lungs to check. There's no lesions. There's other issues. This issue of how they give they administer the medicine with which syringes you use. You'd say, okay, this Kashrut organization, they made sure that they used the other syringes. Other ones, they said, no, we're going to make sure that there are proper people who know what they're doing when they're giving the injections, so they don't cause any problem. There's other problems with the chickens, and that is transportation. When you transport the chicken from one place to another place, you put them into cages, into crates, and when you take them out of the crates, you could dump them from the truck into the next place where they're being taken, and when they falling, it's one of the original 8 treifot. If an animal fell, it could cause a blemish, and so it could be a problem. Maybe when they fell off the crate or out of the crate, that's going to cause a treifa. Yeah.
There's a blood clot on a few of the chickens sometimes.
We're getting there.
Oh,
One second, please. Now, the very simple solution, that is, don't be violent with the chickens. Make sure that you empty the crate in a more humane way that doesn't cause them any damage and any pain. And that's another thing for the supervisors to make sure that if you see that a crate actually fell by accident from a high place, you got to check those chickens to make sure that they have no broken legs, no broken whatever these blemishes are. The 70, you have to make sure, and this is something that the truth is, in 19 says here, 19. What year are we in now? 2022. So in 2012, about 10 years ago, in the state of Israel, the Ministry of Agriculture made new laws about the transport of poultry, which minimizes this problem. So it's by law now in Israel, less problems of tray foot in the chickens. I don't know if necessarily it has a health effect, but I think it has to do with the cruelty to the animals. I think that's why they instituted it. But anyways, that's not such a problem. The next problem we spoke about a little bit, but we'll mention it again, just to get through my material. There's 2 more issues I want to talk about, and I'll take some questions, actually 3 more. One is the conveyor belt, how quickly the shechita gets done. Right? Sometimes the shochet gets tired. He sits there for 10 hours in a row. He's going to make mistakes. And of course, after you do a number of shechitas, you check the knife. If the knife is bad, we said maybe something happened along the way, all those animals become non-kosher. And so you'd think it's in the best interest of the producers of this meat to check as soon as possible. Not so, because checking the knife takes a lot of time. It's much more expensive to check after every chicken than it would be even to check after every 10 chickens. Even if you say that if the knife comes out to be non-kosher and 10 chickens get thrown in the garbage, 10 chickens become deemed not kosher, it's still worth it for them not to take the time to check.
Well, you have several knives, and then you do every 10 chickens, switch out the knife, have someone check it while it's waiting, it comes back, and just it's a cycle. That way you never waste any time. It's
a possibility, but also this is a difference between how quickly that conveyor belts go and how many chickens you do per minute, and how often you check after every 10 or after every 100 chickens. This is a difference between the various supervision organizations, and that's why you have kashrut of this kind and kashrut of that kind. My rabbi actually taught me that this is one reason why it doesn't really make such a big difference, the kashrut of this particular question of how often they check. Because as long as they check, and if the knife is kosher, they're all kosher. And if the knife is non-kosher, they take those 100 chickens or whatever it is, and they throw or give them to the Arabs or whatever it is.
They sell it though, yeah?
Well, yeah, they're allowed to sell it, yeah. But as long as they don't deem them as kosher, so really, what does it matter whether you check them after every 10 or after 20, after 50 or after 100? As long as the ones that are bad get thrown out, if the knife was kosher, the knife was kosher. So really, it's hard to say that adds so much to the value of the kashrut because they check them more often. Also, there's another consideration, is that nowadays checking the knife is really the blemishes in the knife occur much less than they used to, because we have stronger steel. We mentioned this when we were talking about the laws of shechita, and it's very rare that the knife gets nicks from a bone in the neck of a chicken. It's really very rare, and so therefore, any rabbinut which is saying that the shechita is under supervision, I think is reliable. Much more when it comes to chickens. There's much less issues. One issue which there's it became a major question a number of years ago, sort of like a new issue that the rabbis started to get worried about, I'll tell you about it just a second. People wanted to ask questions, so I'll take a round of questions and then I'll tell you one more issue. Yes?
If the chicken used to be a parve, so from those.
It didn't used to be parva.
Yeah, it did. Actually,
No, it didn't. That's like an urban legend. It's clear a machloket tanaim.
Okay.
Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Everybody knows Rabbi Yossi Aglili said that chicken is not meat. That was a machloket. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, 2,000 years ago, his students could eat chicken with meat. But that was a minority, unique opinion. The majority of the rabbis always considered to be chicken, to be poultry, to be considered meat. And of course, everybody agrees it's rabbinically meat, but it's still, that was the law for thousands of years. It's not that once upon a time it was dairy, or once upon a time it was parva. Never was it once upon a time parva. There was a machloket tanaim, but according to the Chachamim, poultry was always considered to be meat, rabbinically meat. Yes, but anyways.
The halakha for the skita of the chicken was already there back then. Right?
Of course, you had to do shchita on chickens always. Yeah.
For sure, it's.
Of course, yes. Another question, yeah.
It was regarding. So, is it considered a blemish if you cut the beak? I've been told that in transportation of animals.
We actually spoke about it. In particular, clipping the beak. Trying to remember what we said about it. Does anybody remember what we said about clipping the beak? It doesn't really make a treifa, I think.
Doesn't it violate a different law?
Of cruelty to animals. Yeah. We spoke about it, yeah.
I was told that that's common to do so they don't peck one another to death when transportation.
Right.
Which is a much bigger concern of blemishes than pecking each other.
Yeah, I don't think it causes too much pain to the animals in any case.
Okay.
But we did discuss it. I can't remember right now where. It was probably in the previous volume, but okay. I don't think it makes it not kosher in any case. You have a question. Shua, David was waiting. Shua, your question.
Does the shofet have to be a person? If I create a machine that does it perfectly every time, how is that not better?
It's a good question. We discussed it in the laws of shchita. You have to do shchita. It has to be a Jew. Does shchita?
So if I have a Jew turn the machine on, it should be fine.
Theoretically, it may be possible. I don't think it's done.
Think about how much time and money you could save, though.
If you
it's going to be more precise than any person will.
Right.
Not yet.
Theoretically, it may be possible. Right. Theoretically, it may be possible. Next question, Ariel. You had a question?
Kind of topic, still kashrut, but it's about medicine. Does medicine have to be kosher? I know some medicine have like animal fats and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so if it has non-kosher ingredients, it's not kosher. But if it has not, sorry, am I interrupting something?
No.
So yeah, medicine can be non-kosher. Usually it's not. Usually it doesn't have anything non-kosher in it. And if it does have a non-kosher item in it, it could be it's batel. Could be it's nullified. Right, if you have 1 in 60, right, it's nullified. But then some people say, well, even if it's nullified 1 in 60, if it's important, then in your mind it becomes very significant. Then even if it's 1 in 1,000, you have to be careful about it. So then they make the distinction. And usually we discussed this before Pesach. We're going to talk about it in the Pesach laws. So what if you have chametz? So then the question becomes if the chametz is used in medicine that has taste, as opposed to pills, right? You have liquid medicine. Usually they add sugar, so that so that's more considered food, whereas swallowing medicine might not even be considered food. So there's a range of issues to be discussed. In general, most medicines don't have non-kosher things, but it's good to check that they don't have. If
they did, if it's pikuach nefesh, you have to do it.
100%. If there's no other way to heal yourself, but most medicines we take nowadays is not for pikuach nefesh. But I'm going around the room. Another question, Yossi. Yeah.
It's quite a basic question, but how do we know which birds are kosher? Like, the more I heard that there's either a specific list, or it's something like any bird that's not bird of prey. Right.
Yeah, that definitely we discussed in the chapter a couple weeks ago, and we had the Torah gives us a list of all the non-kosher birds, and the assumption is, well, the Torah is going to give us the shorter of the two. Either all the non-kosher could have listed all the kosher or the non-kosher. Because it listed the non-kosher, it probably means that everything else is kosher, and so all birds are kosher unless they're on that list. However, we have a tradition that we don't eat poultry unless we have Masorah. A Masorah meaning a tradition that this is a type of bird that Jews have been eating. And so every new type of bird or bird that we haven't discovered before, even though it's not one of the 11, there's a list of 11 birds which are not kosher, we don't eat it. We only eat birds that we have a tradition about.
So how do you get turkey?
So again, we discussed this a couple weeks ago. You weren't here. So a brief summary, it's sort of like a quirk of halachic history, right? We said the first rabbis that paskined about turkey, they thought it was a form of a chicken. And they said it was kosher. And since then, that pretty much is the way, once the rabbis there said it was kosher. I mean, it's as if there's a tradition. Like I said, it's clearly not one of the 11 that the Torah lists, and so it's a kosher bird. But what about this issue of tradition? How can we have a tradition if it was just newly discovered? The answer is we got around that sort of through a loophole, and most people consider turkey to be kosher today.
I know there's a problem with, say, breeding animals to essentially make new species, right?
A whole nother topic. I want to go back to the laws of
No,
kashrut.
a different question is that if going to made a new species of bird that was part chicken, part quail, for whatever reason, that would be kosher to us, wouldn't it?
We don't have a tradition about it, so it would be problematic. Unless you say it's a form of chicken, and then...
Yeah, it's a form of both of those birds.
Okay, so maybe it would be kosher. It might be kosher.
I have a question on the medicine part. Like when supplements
I can't take the question on the medicine. I want to move ahead with this, with the topic of our shir. Okay, we'll take the more questions about medicine after class. Back to the kashrut or the treifa problems with chicken. There's something called tzomet hagidim. Tzomet hagidim means a bunch. Tzomet is a bunch, or a tzama. A tzama is like a gathering of sinews. There is in the leg of the chicken. There's 16 sinews. These sinews have to be complete. They can't be blemished. They can't be torn. And for most of history until modern times, we follow the majority. Follow the majority. Majority of chickens, all 16 sinews are unbroken. And so you don't have to check them like all the other treifot unless you see a problem. Nowadays, some people say in the modern times, we've noticed more and more of these sinews in the leg are torn. Why? Could be disease. Disease affected these. It's like muscles and ligaments in the leg of the chicken, and we see more and more problems. And some rabbis saying, well, we got to check the tzomet hagidim. We got this group of sinews in the leg. You got to check them now because of this new disease which started to affect the poultry. Other people say it doesn't make it. Doesn't even when you have this disease. First of all, not all the chickens have this disease, and even when you do find some chickens have the disease, it's still not a majority. We can still follow the majority. Question is it a significant minority, significant enough, which makes you, force you to check? And Rabbi Melamed here is lenient, and he says, sometimes you could do a check, do a what's that called? A spot check. It was sampling, to take a sampling of this flock of chickens. If you see that they all have problems, or there's a significant amount of them that have problem in this tzomet hagidim, so then you'll check all of them. But if you do a sampling and you don't find them, then it's so this is another sticking point where you'll have maybe some kosher organizations saying, we're not going to give a certification unless we've checked this additional part of the chicken. But otherwise, other organizations say it's a minority, doesn't have to be checked. Now, how to check also? If you, let's say you want to be machmir and you say, I want to check this sinews. Some people say you got to cut them open. But some people say, no, as long as you look from the outside and you don't see any reddening or any blood clotting, so then there's no reason to assume that there's any damage. So both of these methods, though, they're being machmir that you should check. And so again, there's room to have all these different opinions about these various issues, and that's why you'll have various kashrut organizations. Even in the issue of kashrut of chickens, you can have debates amongst the rabbis. What about their lungs? That's not one of the seven. That's not one of the, there's a custom that you have to check the lungs of animals, of goats, of sheep, of cows, but not of chickens. It's very rare that the chickens' lungs have problems to it, and that's why most kashrut organizations don't check the lungs. Nowadays, there is also usually what they do in order to process chickens. There's a vacuum. They suck out all of the internal organs after the shechita, and they hang them up to dry because people eat them. People eat internal organs of chickens, right? You ever had chicken livers? Maybe here in the yeshiva they sell them. Chicken hearts, people eat them. And so you can actually look at the internal organs hanging on these, they hang them out to dry, and you can see. If you can see that there's problems in these internal organs, so then you're going to go and check the rest of the organs, check the lungs as well. But if you, sorry if this is a little too much detail, but most of these problems are very rare. And now finally to your question about the blood. Sometimes you'll get a piece of chicken and you'll eat what's a polka? Everybody know what a polky is? A polky. Polky. It's a Yiddish word for a drumstick. It's the thigh, not the thigh, but the leg of the chicken. Polka. Polka, by the way, Machon Meir has a children's show on TV where they teach Torah to children. It's a great show. One of the characters is called Polka. Chicken drumstick, yes. That's his name. I think he dresses like a chicken or something. I don't know. They call him Polka. Anyways. You saw them filming? Nice.
I saw them filming yesterday, yeah.
Excellent, cool. So you should have asked, who's Polka? Which one of you is the drumstick? Now, what happens is sometimes when you see the drumstick, you see a bruise. And we just said, wait, maybe that's a sign that one of those sinews got damaged, one of those 16 sinews. Also, sometimes you'll see another part of the chicken that just has, you open up the chicken and you see a big chunk of blood. In the chicken, in the meat also. So weren't they supposed to get out all the blood? The answer is, all those cases are kosher. Why? Because you don't know, maybe this damage to the drumstick happened after the shechita, which is no problem. It is possible. That amount of blood, maybe that amount of blood, that the collection of blood got collected after the shechita and after the malicha. Malicha is, we're going to learn about it, that where they salt the meat to get out all the blood. So if you've done the proper process of malicha, every other blood is not considered to be halachic blood. And so it's kosher. And so you don't have to worry about it. Although, if you do see a big chunk of blood, I would throw it out and not eat it. You're not supposed to eat blood, and it looks like blood, even though it's not called halachically considered blood. Once you've done the salting process, that part don't eat. But you don't have to assume the worst, that if you see some torn ligaments in the drumstick that you're eating, you don't have to assume that happened before the shechita. You can assume that got pulled out. Many times, also a broken leg. Sometimes you see The bone is broken. Wait, broken bone, isn't that treif? That's a treifa. It's one of the 72. So how can you eat? You see the drumstick or the wing that you have that you're eating, you see it's broken. It could have happened during the butchering. It could have happened afterwards. Not necessarily did it happen when the chicken was still alive. So you don't have to assume that it's treifa. And therefore, all these are kosher unless you see something that's really, really, extraordinary, very bloody or very, suspect. So you ask a rabbi, ask him what he thinks. But if you're worried about it, take another drumstick. But don't think that every time you see a problem, automatically it means that wait, they're serving me non-kosher meat here. This is not usually it's stuff that happens after shechita. Last question. Yeah.
Yeah. If that is the case, is it? Can I usually what happened? I used to wash them with salt, the brand new one, the big one.
Oh
so
no.
I don't have to do it. It's not mandatory or something like that. I mean, if they have already done it in the...
If you buy from the store meat that says kosher and salted, you don't have to do anything more to it. Usually, what's advised is to rinse it off in water or soak it in water because it's too salty from all the salting process. You're saying you want to add more salt to it? Not necessary. Not necessary. Halachically, now, you have to be careful. You can buy in the supermarket. Sometimes it'll say this meat has been slaughtered, kosher, but has not been salted.
Right.
Then you have to give it a proper salting process, and you got to know what you're doing. That's what we're going to learn the laws of how to do kosher salting. But it's rare, more and more rare nowadays. In very expensive stores, sometimes they will sell this type of meat, and they're relying on you to do the salting yourself. But most places, if it says kosher, it's been slaughtered kosher and been through a salting process, and so you don't have to do anything more at home.
Also, Arthas, the thing that Araf was talking about, the cutting of the lollipops, they already check it. They have a cutting, if you see that. The plastic one, the one that's back in the plastic. It's cheapened, right? But if any chicken you take it, they have...
I don't know what you're referring to, but if you do see that the leg was cut open, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
It's a sign that they were checking this tzomet hagidim.
Yeah, they do.
Right, that they were checking this bunch of it's like ropes, this bunch of sinews, and if it was opened, that's one way of checking it. We said you could also check it from the outside, and we said maybe you don't have to check it at all. It's such a minority of chickens that have this disease that are affecting the sinews that maybe you don't have to check it at all. But definitely doesn't mean that it's not kosher if you see it's slit open. Okay, we have to stop here. There's another class, so we'll continue.